Alright, so this here is a 60 gig ps3 board, and what I'm going to show you is just how to remove the heat sinks off this board if you need to reflow or reball or whatever deal you wanted to do. So the first one I'll remove is the RSX chip. I've actually pre-removed all these heat sinks. I'm just showing how I did it. The best way to do the RSX one is get a little piece of cardboard, about as thick as, say, like a cigarette pack, something like that. Then the important thing to do is make sure you insert it in the middle side here between the CPU and the RSX. There's little components actually underneath the RSX heatsink that you'll break off if you try cramming something in underneath the heatsink on any of these other sides. So what you do is take a little piece of cardboard, slip it in underneath here. There's two little RAM chips on the corners that this will fit between. And then what I did is actually I just took a little butter knife and then just stick a butter knife in there and just kind of work it in. You can put it in a decent distance, a good 1/4 inch. The actual chip is right in here, good, probably about a 1/2 inch deep. Then you just pry it up, and then what will happen is that if you use enough force, the RSX heatsink will actually pop off. And as you can see, I've actually already removed this RSX chip. But that's what will be left. And this is what the RSX chip looks like once the heatsink is off. I've actually already pre-cleaned this RSX chip. There's a bunch of thermal adhesive on the corners and then just some thermal paste on top of the chip in the center there. I've actually already, as you can see, lifted this RSX chip and cleaned it up so that it can be reballed later. Alright, so the next heatsink I removed was the one off of the CPU. And to do that, what I used actually was a putty knife. It might actually be too much tool for the job, but it did work alright. I've seen other people use razor blades to get in underneath the heatsink on all the sides, which I think I might actually invest in one of those. But once I came up with the technique of how to use the putty knife, it did work out alright. The thing with the CPU is there's actually quite a thick layer of adhesive all the way around it, and it's pretty strong stuff. I actually had to use quite a bit of force to get the putty knife in all the way around. The problem is the more force I had to use, it just becomes harder to control it. This actually was a garbage board for me, but I definitely made it that way after a couple minutes of prying on this thing, so I ended up snapping off a few of these little components around the corners of the chip. So I guess be careful with this one. It's definitely the most challenging heatsink to remove for sure. And like I said, all I did was I wedged the corner of the putty knife all the way around the sides that I could, and then eventually you'll get enough in that I could just slip the putty knife in underneath and pop it off. So I'll show you what it looks like underneath here. So that's what the heat sink looks like once it's removed. Actually, I tried to clean this CPU up a little bit already. Can't see the paste on there anymore, but you can see on the heat sink here that it is quite a thick layer of adhesive that they have around there. And you can see that you can get the putty knife in, or a razor blade, or whatever you're using, pretty far in. There's no little components on the chip like the RSX, so you kind of can put it in there all the way around. A good 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch possibly, that you can put this underneath there to try and pry it up. But the adhesive they use on this is quite strong, so it does take, like I said, quite a bit of force to actually pry it off. Here is the South Bridge chip. It's actually pretty easy to remove. Again, I just used my putty knife on this one. At this point I had wrecked this board enough that I didn't really care anymore. But the putty knife actually worked really well. The adhesive underneath the south bridge is not as thick. It seems like it's a different type of material that they use to glue down the heat sink for the south bridge. And the putty knife, it actually went in pretty easily. And again, it's similar to the CPU in the fact that there's no components on top, no other RAM chips or anything like that on the top. So again, you can put the putty knife in. You know, I wouldn't go any farther than a 1/2 inch either way. You know. Again, the adhesive underneath this heatsink is also pretty thin, and it goes in pretty easy all the way around. And then again, just put it in there and pry it a little bit. And that's what the south bridge looks like once the heat sink is removed. So you can see that the adhesive that they used on the south bridge isn't nearly as thick, or as strong for that matter, as the CPU adhesive. And here you can see this other chip that had a heatsink on top. I'm not even sure what to call this one. It's some kind of graphics chip of some sort, obviously. But this one, the heatsink is actually very thin. I was debating whether or not to even take it off, but at that point I pretty much ruined this board already, so I figured I'd just pop it off just to see kind of what's going on there. And what I've came up with, besides the fact that it was pretty difficult to get off, you can see what kind of happened after I did pry this one off. I'm going to go out on a limb and pretty much say that this heatsink is not meant to come off. It seems like it's almost like fiberglass material underneath there. It pretty much just tore the top layer of the chip off, of like the green stuff down there. Pretty much the top layer, the actual BGA, I guess, came off, stuck to it. But it's a very thin heatsink anyway, and compared to say like the even the south bridge heatsink, like it's probably maybe a 1/2 millimeter thick heatsink on this one. And even if I had a good method of peeling it off, like you can see, it's very thin. It bent all the crap just trying to pry it off. So even if you had to reflow or reball this one, I would, now that I know how hard it is to actually take off and it doesn't look like it comes off very easily, I would actually probably just reflow or lift this chip with the heatsink attached to it, because the heatsink isn't really that thick, and I don't think the extra heat that it's going to retain is going to be that big of an issue for the chip itself. So anyway, that's what I did to remove all these heat sinks, and that's what it looks like underneath them anyway. So if you do want to come up with your own method of trying to get the heat sinks off, at least now you'll know what it does look like underneath them, so you don't have to worry about breaking anything off underneath them. So hopefully that helps a few people. Thanks.